Hey guys, welcome back to Will's Garage. Today I'm going to show you how to reseal the cam girdles on an Audi 3.2 liter V6. Stay tuned. I've got the valve covers off on both sides. This is probably something I should point out. This here is a tool to lock the camshafts at top dead center for timing purposes. There's one for each side. You can see on that side. You could buy these relatively cheap. I think I've seen them as cheap as maybe $40 for the pair and the tool that locks the crankshaft underneath. I just made them. I have access to a machine shop. I just put them on the bridge, piece of aluminum on the Bridgeport, machined it out, and now I have two cam locking tools. So I'm going to be using Volkswagen and Audi's online technician program. It's called Elsa Pro. So if you know anyone that's in a dealership, this is what a dealer technician has access to, so they can see how to properly disassemble, time, seal, whatever you need to know. All that information is there. I'll try to post some of that information in the description as I can. A lot of it is pretty much copyrighted, so I can't just post anything, but I try to post the important stuff. Like if I can, I'll post the sequences to torquing things down. I'll definitely post torque specs at least, and the sealant I use to seal everything back up. Alright, so I'm going to try to set up the camera. First thing I got to do is I'm going to take off the upper cam phasers so I can get the chain off of both cylinder head banks, because I want to remove the cam girdle. Like I said, I'm also resealing this motor, so I'm going to remove those guys first, get the cam girdle off. Now I'm going to remove the cam phasers. Again, there's a special tool which would grab the phaser so you can then get the bolt loose. You don't want to rely on the cam alignment tool to hold. You don't want to rely on the cam alignment tool to remove these bolts. They are pretty tight. I'm not sure on the spec, but I can only imagine just looking at the size of them that they are pretty tight. So you really want to use that tool. You don't really want to grab the cam anyway. Yeah, tool goes in here, break them loose. These are standard threads, so there's no funky reverse threads or anything like that. So I've broken these loose off camera. I had a little bit of difficulty with it. Pretty boring to watch, so I'm sure you guys didn't really care to see that. Again, special tool holds the phaser, get the bolt out. This is a pretty big size bolt. This is a 14, I think it's a 14 millimeter triple square for this. I have to imagine if you made it this far already that you probably have these sockets. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove the phasers. Again, I've marked my phasers so I know my left and my right. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull these phasers off. I'm going to get the tensioners out. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start removing the cam girdles. Okay guys, so I've got the cam girdle off, I've got the camshafts off, both sides. Was a little tricky, get this side off, nothing major, it's just held in with the alignment dowels here. You know, they must be just a little bit rusted up or something, so it was a little hard to get it up, but came up no problem. These cam holders are really useful because it literally is holding the camshafts to the girdles, so made it easy to get everything out in one swoop. And now I can clean these things up really well so I can reseal them, so I don't have to worry about leaks. There's a couple of spots here where there are grooves. I can show it there. There are grooves that need to be cleaned out. You see another one down there, as well as the gasket that's in the middle here. This is getting replaced with a liquid gasket, so that same black sealant is going to go in place of that. I'll try to show you some of the specifics from Elsa. I'll try to literally just film it off of my computer. I think that might be easiest. And then maybe I can put a timestamp in the description that'll show, you know, what to do at what point. You know, meaning like the removal procedure, which bolts you take out, in what sequence. You know, because some of these lobes are pushing down on the valves. You want to remove this thing evenly so not to warp it. Same goes for reinstallation. So I'll try to capture some of that stuff from the Elsa program. But yeah, at this point, I'm still trying to get everything apart so I can clean it really well before I can reassemble. I've got quite a bit to clean up on the block, or at least in the cylinder head here. You can see I got silicone there. The same with the lower cover, where it goes on the block. I got to clean all that up. Once all these bolts are tightened down by hand, the torque sequence is the same. You're going to tighten these down to 8 Newton meters plus 90 degrees of turn. Okay guys, again, this is 8 Newton meters, so the equivalent is roughly 70 inch-pounds. So I've got an inch-pound torque wrench here. I showed you guys the sequence, so I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to bring these all down to my 8 Newton meters. I've run them all down by hand. This is my 8 Newton meters. So I'm just going to go through the sequence. I'm going to tighten all these down first to my 8 Newton meters, or 70 inch-pounds. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to give them an additional 90-degree turn. Not going to use a torque wrench to do that. You don't want to do it. You'll damage your torque wrench. You want to use just a regular ratchet or a breaker bar when you do any kind of torque to yield bolt. So I'm going to finish doing this. I'm going to tighten the other cylinder head, get that installed, which is pretty much the same way this left bank was. And then I'll touch base again. Okay guys, like I said, I'm going to do the 90-degree torque to yield on all these bolts, the same sequence. I'm going to use a regular ratchet. This one's a little long, so it's a little easier for the leverage. Don't use your torque wrench. You will damage it. In the future, you won't get an accurate torque. So I'm going to go ahead right now. I'm going to torque all these things 90-degree turns. I'll show you guys how I do that. Usually just try to find a nice parallel spot on the head, and I know 90 degrees my ratchet should be facing down, so I'm going to do the same sequence, but I'm going to bring these things down full 90 turn. Same sequence. Just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish torquing all these things down, both sides, and then I'll show you guys the amount of sealant that is squeezed out of here, both on the outside and the inside, so you can see it. Okay guys, I have all the bolts torqued down to 8 Newton meters, and then my final 90-degree turn. Everybody's in place. I've got my cam alignment tool back into place. You know, the only mistake I made when I made this is I made this too wide, so I couldn't get to the 2 middle bolts. So I got to them, left these off, did all my torque, put them back on, so everything's back in alignment. I wanted to show you guys, you see that black line there? That's the sealant that has squeezed out. As you can see, it's very little. There's not much there. If you look in the inside, see that? Very little. There's not much. And that was 1 millimeter bead. Can you imagine if you would have used more, you would have more squeezing out. Not to mention that this tube of sealant is very expensive. You don't want it getting into the engine, clogging up oil galleys or the oil pump pickup screen. As for the squeeze out here, I'll probably just wipe this off, because when I go to put the rear timing chain cover on, that's going to get silicone, well, I keep saying silicone, it's going to get the Volkswagen sealant on there before that goes on, so that'll seal all this up again. Same thing with where the vacuum pump goes in. You see I've got some that's squeezed out here. I'm going to wipe this out because the the vacuum pump is a pretty close tolerance fit, and I don't want this silicone in there you know, giving me any trouble or scraping off and then clogging up the oil passage, which is right there. So I'm going to wipe this out while it's wet. Same with the front surface, because that gets a gasket as well. I've already wiped the plugs where I put, you know, the little bit of sealant on there. You can see the same for the other side. Cam girdle, you can see just that little bit of squeeze out there. Same thing with the inside, very subtle amount, not a lot, and the same with the back. So I wanted to show you guys, besides these upper brackets that I made here for holding the camshafts on both banks, if you come down on the driver's side of the motor, there's a hole here. Now this hole is behind the motor mount, but you could still get to this. Either if you see this little kind of opening here on the exhaust manifold, that's how I was able to get through there to remove that plug when the motor mount was in place. So if you are doing this job, let's say you're just replacing the upper tensioners and gaskets up there in the car, which is possible, you can get to this hole here. And what that hole is, if I could show it in the camera, that hole down in there is actually the crankshaft. There's a hole drilled into the, I'm assuming it's the counterweight of the crankshaft. And I went ahead and I made this tool. So this is my version of the crankshaft locking pin, which comes in the kit if you either rent the cam retaining plates or buy it yourself. Like I said, it's relatively inexpensive. I'll put in the description the tool numbers so you can look them up. But the way this works is this end of the pin is what's going to go into the crankshaft, and the threads here just kind of hold it into place. So you know that when this is inserted, that the crankshaft is at top dead center. So that's in there. My camshafts are being retained with the flat threaded spots facing up with these brackets. So my cams are set to top dead center on both sides. You do need both of these tools in there. I'm going to install my upper tensioners and guides on both sides. Get my sprockets in the camshafts just kind of in place for now. From there, once the chain is in, everything looks good. I'm going to tighten up my cam phasers on both sides. And again, as long as the camshaft retaining bracket is in place and my pin is in the crankshaft, everything should be perfectly in time. Okay, so this is my left side cam guide tensioner assembly. It takes 6 bolts. I have all my bolts laid out here. I'm going to put Loctite on all these. The holes in the cylinder head I've cleaned out with brake clean as well. The surface here where the gasket goes is nice and clean, no dirt, nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the guide tensioner into place, get the bolts started, get my chain just draped around, and then I'm going to position in my upper cam phasers. Make sure you use new bolts for these. Off the top of my head, I think the torque spec is 40 newton meters, then 80 newton meters, then an additional 90 degrees. So these do need to be tightened very tight, and that is a torque to yield bolt. So it's always a good idea to replace the bolts when you replace these. So I'm going to go ahead, start installing this guy, and then I'll come over to the right side and do the same thing. Okay, so these are the left bank cam phasers. There's no difference between the right and left bank, they're both the same. The difference is one is labeled exhaust, one is labeled intake. It actually, I know it's not going to show up on camera, but it's laser etched into the cam phaser. It says intake right here underneath the Audi symbol. On this one it says exhaust. On the sprocket as well, this one says EX and this one says IN for intake. So make sure you put these on the right camshafts when you install them. Since my cams are being retained with that plate, it does not matter which way these go. Just make sure you get the chain on there. This is intake. On this side. And this is my exhaust. No, it doesn't call for it, so I put Loctite on these. We're going to go here. Cam, and with any torque yield bolt, it's a good idea to put a little bit of oil on the flange side of the bolt. It'll make it easier when you're doing your torque and your torque to yield. It also gives you a better torque or a more accurate torque on the bolt. So I'm going to run these down. I'm going to tighten these. At least just run them down for now. I'm going to get the right side chain tensioner and phasers in with the chain, tighten everything up. Okay guys, I know I didn't show you guys how I loosened up the bolts for the cam phasers. Like I said, these are very tight. This is the tool I made up to hold the cam phasers while either removing or tightening that center bolt. Now that bolt gets tightened down or pre-torqued to 40 Newton meters and then a final torque of 80 Newton meters. After that, you're going to tighten it an additional 90 degrees. So there's quite a bit of torque on that. And you don't want to rely on the cam holding bracket here to tighten that bolt. You'll either break the camshaft, break this bolt. It's just not going to hold it. The way this works is I just drilled 2 holes, a center hole so I can get the socket in there. And it's pretty much just going to give me a leverage point so I can put this on the phaser, get the socket in here, hold the phaser while tightening this bolt. The one thing I need to mention to you guys is when you are tightening this, the pre-tension, you need to make sure you're rotating the phaser clockwise. The reason for that is the tensioner is on this side, and if you do it say like this, you're going to have slack on the chain here, and your timing's going to be off. So you have to make sure that you have some kind of pressure pushing down while you're pre-tightening these to your 40 Newton meters. After that, these should be cinched enough on the camshaft where they're not going to move. You can then keep this from rotating while you torque down to your 80 Newton meters, and then finally your 90-degree turn. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now to both sides. Okay guys, I want to clarify that a little bit more. So as you can see here, if I turn this counterclockwise, as if you were going to use that tool to, counter hold as you're turning clockwise, your chain's going to be slack, your timing's going to be off. So that first torque, you need to actually hold this counter hold tool so you're turning the phaser clockwise on the right bank exhaust camshaft. So hold this clockwise while you tighten this middle bolt to 40 Newton meters. You could then go ahead and do the intake, the same, pre-torque it to pre-torque it to 40 Newton meters. When you get to the left side here, because the exhaust is now on the left side and the tensioner is here on the right, you need to hold the intake cam phaser the same way. So you're gonna hold this till it's clockwise, pre-tension your 40 Newton meters on your intake camshaft, and then come back with your exhaust camshaft, 40 Newton meters, and then finally come back to your 80 Newton meters and then your 90-degree turn. You're plenty of Okay guys, so all 4 bolts for all 4 camshafts are tightened down. The initial 40 holding the exhaust camshaft on the right side cylinder head clockwise till you could tighten both of these. Keep the tool in the exhaust camshaft holding clockwise while you tighten this bolt as well as the intake bolt. Don't move the tool for the initial torque. On the left side, you're going to hold the intake clockwise, pre-tighten 2 center bolts, 40 Newton meters. Once you have that, come back, hold your exhaust camshaft. You're going to tighten this down to 80 Newton meters. This time you're going to have to use the tool to hold back you spinning the bolt. Once you do the exhaust, hold the intake, tighten it to 80 Newton meters. Same on the other side. Whatever one you're tightening, make sure the tool's on there holding it back. You don't want to use the chain to try to hold back 80 Newton meters, and especially not the 90-degree turn. 80 Newton meters comes out to be about 59 foot-pounds. So I'm now going to use my breaker bar. Don't want to use your torque wrench. I've said this before, you will damage your torque wrench. I'm going to hold each cam separately, and I'm going to turn these bolts to 90 degrees. After that, everything should be timed. I can then release the tensioner grenade pins, and I can check, make sure everything is timed properly. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these 90 degrees now. The upper timing covers, though, those are pretty straightforward and simple. I'm going to put sealant on the cover itself, the same 1mm bead all the way around, and then the T30 Torx bolts just hold the covers on both sides. Alright guys, this is pretty much it. I've got the valve covers back on, I've got the rear timing covers back on, I've got my vacuum pump back on in the front and my high pressure fuel pump on this side. You know, with the cam girdle itself, a couple of key tips that you need to remember. You're going to need the cam retaining tool, as well as the crank tool to lock the crankshaft, because you are going to have to remove the upper timing chains, which is not a big deal. You don't have to worry about timing in the bottom as long as the crank is locked and your cams are retained with that plate. You know, when you tighten the upper sprockets, it's going to be timed as long as everything is in place there. Make sure you clean out the cam girdles very good, because you are going to be putting sealant there. In the video I pointed out to put sealant around the cam solenoid itself that goes through the center of the cylinder and both sides. I'm assuming the real reason for that is, you know, that there is oil pressure slots in the girdles, and they don't want oil seeping up through the bolts where it goes through. So you don't really have to worry so much if you get the sealant in the hole where you put the gasket in the location I showed you. But that is the only place on both sides when you have it. You don't need to put it around all the spark plug tubes. But it is a good idea to replace that gasket in case you have oil leaking into the into the spark plug tubes. The other thing I wanted to point out, when you tighten the cam phasers, make sure you follow those directions. On this side, the exhaust cam phaser, you need to hold clockwise while you pre-torque the bolts. On the left side, you need to hold the intake phaser clockwise while you pre-torque the bolts. If I remember correctly, it's 40 Newton meters. After that, you're going to counter hold all four to do your other torque specs, 80 Newton meters, and then your final 90 on both. The 4 bolts should be replaced when you take these off as well, so keep that in mind when you're ordering parts or picking up parts. They are torque to yield. Pretty much any torque to yield bolt on an Audi, a Volkswagen, you have to replace, because torque to yield means you're literally stretching the bolt out, and once you stretch it, it's a good practice to replace the bolt. So, I hope you guys like this video. If you have any questions, please just drop me a comment below. I'll answer the questions best I can. Even if I missed a torque spec you're looking for, just let me know. I usually answer them pretty quick. But that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time.